My name is Dr. Terri Horton, and I'm a workforce futurist. That means that my work sits at the intersection of the future of work, AI, and what that means to organizations and people. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the power of elevating the human experience in the workplace. So I'm going to take you on a journey, and I want you to follow me and come with me on that journey, but this time through the lens of an employee. What do we know about the future of work? It's all about digital transformation. It's about organizations using data, people, and technology in game-changing ways in order to drive innovation and growth. We also know that analytics are at the heart of this. Analytics are the engine. It's the engine that drives all of this. But in the process of driving this transformation, we can't lose sight of the human experience. Now, we know we collect a lot of data, right? We've been talking about that over the course of the last couple of days. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the data we collect on the recruitment side, performance management side, as well as on the L&D side. But I want you to think about this as if you were explaining it to your neighbor, to a colleague that sits outside of the data science space and the analytics space. So think about explaining, right? Think about the perceptions. Think about the eyes, the faces you will see as you explain some of this. I see them when I'm training on the topic and even teaching in higher education around the topic. So we know we collect a host of data on the recruitment side. Let's use, for an example, when we're utilizing video interviewing platforms that are powered by AI. We collect biometric, psychometric data around face, voice, age, gender, race, sentiment, behavior, and even emotions. What about assessments? We use a lot of assessments to identify prime candidates. We use neuroscience-based assessments that use millions of data points to tap into a candidate's level of cognition, their personality, and even their propensity for fit. On the performance management side, as we look to drive productivity, we collect data from emails, calendars, facial analysis, biometric physical analysis, or data, all to power performance, get a little more productivity. Think of how you would explain this to a colleague. Think of how you would explain this and the perception of those that aren't in our space. What about in L&D? This is one of my favorite spaces. This is where my expertise is. And I'm really excited about some of the things that we're doing in L&D, particularly with virtual reality and mixed reality, to drive more immersive learning experiences. But think about what we collect. Data about a worker's cognition, their attention span, even their tolerance for stress. This is a lot of personal information, physical information, in addition to data that we collect specific to performance. But what do workers think? Surprisingly, a study conducted by Accenture revealed that more than 90% of workers are okay with their employers collecting data. I was actually surprised when I saw this statistic. But in context, and the context is that the data collected will be used to empower their experience in the workplace, provide better opportunities for development, even contribute perhaps to their wellness or their ability to drive their wellness. So they're okay with that in context. The next statistic from the same Accenture study is more troubling. This statistic says that 70% of C-level executives are not confident that they're actually using data in highly responsible ways. That means it positions the organization for higher levels of risk, brand reputation, operational risk, financial risk, but more importantly, risk to the employee experience and outcomes. So we have to think about impact. As we move through this process and we're utilizing data and we're doing phenomenal things in the space to drive organizational transformation, if 70% of C-level executives believe that they're not using data highly responsibly, we need to take a look at impact. So let's do that. We're going to take a look at impact across gender, age, and even people of color. So let's start with gender. There are a host of examples that we can draw from about organizations that didn't get this right? Amazon is an example of one of those organizations that their AI job recruiting tool was flawed. And as a result, it resulted in a bias against hiring women. A lot of factors contribute to that. Two primary factors: there weren't enough women, the women were rare in the data set, and also they used old historical applicant data. Something that was really interesting from this piece too was that once investigated, it was revealed that men use stronger action verbs than women. And as a result, that was another factor that contributed to lower levels of ranking and subsequent hiring of women. We can step outside of Amazon. Even as we take a look at how data is used on the recruitment side, think about video interviewing. Think about the potential impact to the LGBT community. We have a long way to go yet in perfecting facial analysis, facial recognition, and voice. What are the potential impacts? Older workers. Interesting case: Verizon, UPS, Facebook, involved in a federal lawsuit now that alleges that they engaged in age bias discrimination. How? In this particular case, it was how they made job positions viewable, particularly to older workers, and the results were dim. So as a result, they are fighting today to defend their brand reputation and to defend their sustainability around this particular issue. But what else? I'll tell you a secret. Now, you may not know this, or you may not perceive this, but I am a worker of a certain age. So, what about data selection tied to, we want to collect as much data as possible to infer as much about a potential candidate as possible to make sure that we're hiring the right candidates. What about criteria that analyzes names? Well, here's the secret. Of course, my name is Terri, but Terri was a name given to female babies that were born in the 1960s and the 70s. So even though I might not disclose that, or the data, the information about my background and when I graduated, all that sort of stuff, may not infer my age, my name might. And if it did, you'd know that I was in my mid-50s. What about selection criteria tied to college degrees? Think about how many degrees did not exist 5, 10 years ago. So you may have workers or candidates that are applying for roles that are highly qualified, but there's not a catch for their type of degree. It's another way. These are kind of the less obvious ways that we can have disparate impact to older workers. What about workers of color? We know that D&I is at the forefront of the future of work. We know that there's a lot of company effort, financial commitment devoted around culture to making sure that organizations optimize diversity. So we cannot believe and expect the data to correct some of the ills associated with bias. So some of the data may perpetuate historical inequities, obviously may introduce unconscious bias. But what about something else? Let's go back to that example of recruiting, right? So utilizing an AI video interviewing platform, what we know for sure is that we've got some work to do with facial recognition around faces of color. How might that impact a candidate's ability to be selected or even move forward to a recruiter? What about access and exposure? What about people of color who don't have access to consistent internet access, or even are not aware of or have been exposed to the whole notion of video interviewing? I'm a college professor as well, and in all of my classes, I infuse the impact of AI on work and also the role of analytics. And I can tell you that the faces of my undergraduate and graduate students, when I talk to them about the role of analytics, the look is of shock and horror most of the time. I get questions like, can they really do that? Yes. That's way off in the future, right? They're not really doing that? No, right? So, what about the folks that don't know about it? What about potential candidates who are very, very able, great skills, qualifications, and as part of the interviewing process, they have to complete an interview that involves virtual reality, gamification, and simulations. Walmart uses those in fantastic ways when they're hiring for their e-commerce platforms. So what happens to those workers by way of access, exposure, and some of the inherent biases and issues and concerns that we know that exist tied to this? What are some other areas? Yeah, so what about impact to candidates that are just completely missed, or not seen, or not selected because of machine learning that refers candidates based on the preferences of recruiters? What about criteria based on geographics? A lot of employers like to hire candidates that live within a 10 or 15 mile radius of the organization or the location. Who gets left behind? What about selection criteria based on college or university? I have a doctorate from USC. I've got micro-credentials in AI business strategy and data analytics from Cornell as well. What if I didn't? What would that mean if that was a part of the selection criteria? What about selection criteria tied to preferences for candidates who work for organizations of similar size and culture? Who's left? Who's missed? What's the impact to the organization by potentially missing out on the value of that talent? Performance management, lots of example in that space. So we collect data to do benchmarking so that we can set the stage for how we want to evaluate employees and potentially promote and move them through the organization. What about structural bias that's inherently in that data? Who does it affect? Older workers, younger workers, workers of color, workers of a certain age, perhaps. Where I get a lot of feedback from students and from employees when I'm training is around how we assess employee or worker engagement. This doesn't sit very well. Why? It feels invasive and intrusive, right? So questions arise like this. What if the algorithm is assessing one data point is tied to my level of engagement and connection to my work, and it's assessing my morale and my sentiment, but I'm going through a divorce. And what the data is picking up has absolutely nothing to do with my commitment to my work, my dedication to the role and to the organization. What about privacy issues? What biases can arise? What happens when an employee feels that he or she has to self-declare a personal issue because of the data that comes from systems that evaluate engagement and risk flight, or flight risk? So, we have a responsibility to protect. Does that make sense? How do we protect the human experience? Part of it has been discussed, across this conference for the last 2 days. Heavy emphasis on data and ethics. Burson has a framework that's fantastic for this. It's focused on maintaining privacy, protecting privacy, protecting security, mitigating bias, and looking at people impact, not just for performance issues, but also for opportunities, and the importance of crafting and implementing policies around ethics and responsibility. Those are some of the ways that we can protect the human experience. But it's not just about protecting. It's also about facilitating the human experience. I use millennials and Gen Z as examples for a couple of reasons. What do we know? We know that by 2025, 70% of employees will be what? Millennials, with Gen Z coming up from behind. So what do they want? They want to be able to trust us. That's extraordinarily important. They want transparency. They want to be able to see what we're doing with the data. They want a level of privacy. They don't want to work in a corporate surveillance state. How about that? So they want minimal surveillance, and particularly surveillance that results in punitive measures. They want control of their data. They want to be able to opt out. They want to be able to port their data. And they also want to be able to have some level of voice around the destruction of their data. This one pops up a lot. They really want to know, so you're collecting insights about my cognition, how I manage stress, my mood and emotions all of the time. Like, how are you merging that? Are you merging that with data about my performance? And more importantly, if you are merging the data, what's the outcome for me? And is the outcome negative? What else do they want? They want that data working for them. They want the data working for them. So remember that statistic. 92% of employees are okay with the collection of data within context. So how can we collect it, show them, tie that data to opportunities for development to help them improve their work? How do we make the work more interesting and compelling? How do we use the data to help them become more creative or innovative? How do we use the data to help them understand their own development, not just what they need today, but development in the context of the work that they will do tomorrow, either with us or without us? How about using the data to help them reimagine work, explore new career trajectories? And how about using that data that we collect about stress tolerance, emotions, right? How about using that as a way to provide opportunities for them, programs and strategies to increase their wellness and improve in those spaces? That's letting data work for them. We've got an imperative. The PAFOW community, we understand what we're supposed to do with the data. It's about driving performance, better outcomes, and also experience. This quote is powerful. It's from Brookings. Will we leave some groups of people worse off as a result of the algorithm's design? Or worse yet, what are the unintended consequences? Pause on that for a moment. That quote can help us stay grounded in the importance and our responsibility to use data for good and to create and facilitate opportunities that increase and expand the human worker experience. What else can we do? How about reducing automation bias? This isn't just for us. This is also helping our functional colleagues reduce automation bias, helping them become deep thinkers, and really kind of expanding those insights into new opportunities. We need to lead with a human-centered approach so that we're asking the right questions and making the right decisions and using that data to help us power decisions that elevate our employees while driving performance and productivity. How about using data in novel ways? How can we enrich or expand the worker experience? How can we build better levels or communities of worker and communities? How can we build collective intelligence that powers the work and powers the worker? How can we help them better collaborate? How can we drive the social ability of our workers and capitalize on that on the creativity, growth, and innovation side? I really like this one. How can we use the data to help them become better versions of themselves? I came up with these terms, and I'll tell you what they mean. So if we're going to preserve and empower the human experience in the workplace, I argue that we need to become what I call brand defenders and sustainers. We are guardians of privacy, and we are guardians of the brand health of the organization by making sure that we're analyzing and making sure that the organization doesn't fall into legal trouble. How about guardians of equity? We are committed to reducing bias. We're committed to leveraging data to drive diversity and inclusion. How about shepherds of the worker experience? Always focused on how can we create a platform that allows our workers to thrive, to grow, and pulling all of that together to have better engaged employees, and that facilitates higher levels of performance and productivity. I really like this one. We should be our brother's keeper. I am my functional brother's keeper. Why? We've talked about how HR professionals are still skilling up and need help in understanding how to use data, not just to read it and analyze it, but to be able to power it for better decisions, better strategies, initiatives, all of that. They need our help, but they're not the only ones. Our functional brothers and sisters across customer service, operations, accounting, and finance need you to help lead them through so that they understand the power of the data that they have and they can make informed decisions that not only drive the business, but also empower employees. Dr. Harari has a powerful, powerful quote. Those who control the data control the future. Who controls the data? Who controls it? You do. That means we drive the future. So I argue that together we should commit to using data for good, using that data to empower workers so that they are resilient, they stay relevant, they are bold as they move through the future of work, and we allow them to thrive. That is my wish, that is my hope for the PAFOW community and everyone else who has a role in using data to drive the future of work. Thank you.
I do have this, as this came up for me as you were sharing. I have an iPhone, and I had a 6S, and I used fingerprint recognition, which I really liked. And then I got a 10 because I wanted a cool camera, and now there's an 11 and has a cooler camera, so I don't know what to do. I thought the finger recognition would be on the more advanced phone in addition to facial recognition. So I have been reluctant to use facial recognition. Why? Has anyone, I'm not going to ask if you use facial recognition, but have you been reluctant to do that? Because I learned this. Deborah, where are you? Deborah Wise? You're in here? So I had the good fortune of participating at the Northwestern Roundtable on Talent Analytics a couple years ago and this past year as well, which is an outstanding event. And the chief data privacy officer from SAS spoke and told a story about how in the 1900s in Europe, specifically the Benelux countries of Holland, they used to collect data on people, on their religious affiliation, to give them a proper burial because immigration was becoming more prevalent in Europe. And it was a very noble cause. Then something happened. There were a couple wars in the early part of the 20th century, and that data got compromised. And that data was used with malintent. So as you well know, likely as a woman of color, is that we have precedent where there have been institutions that have marketed higher interest credit card rates to certain zip codes because it has been known that there were people of color there, and it was exploitive. So my question to you, given your role and how the world is evolving, is I'm kind of shocked and surprised, but also it's understandable that we do not know how this data is going to be used yet. There's a lot of either blind trust that's being put out or just basic ignorance. And so here we go into the future. So what do you see? I mean, what's your personal belief? Do you have a great deal of hope, or are you setting out a cautionary message to say, hey, there's some things that might not be good used with this data? Because I would hate for facial recognition. It wouldn't bother me so much given how I look, but not many people know that I'm a Mexican American. I'm as Mexican as Barack Obama is black. But not many people see that when they look at me. So that's not going to get picked up on facial recognition. But for other people, who knows how that's going to be used, given how if they start sharing that data unknowingly. So again, what's your personal, is it cautionary or is it hopeful?
A bit of both, and I will say that I share your experience. I recently bought an iPhone 11 and have still not completely I've not activated the facial recognition portion of the phone. I had a conversation with my 20-year-old niece, and I said, yeah, Auntie just keeps resisting. I'm just gonna, keep putting in my code until I just can't take it anymore. She said, why are you resisting? I already have a snapshot of your face. They can match your face to pictures. Give in, Auntie. You're resisting for nothing. So that was kind of a thing for me too. Here's my take on facial recognition. We have a great example of how facial recognition is being used in other countries. China is an example of a country that utilizes that a lot. So we don't have to imagine where this can go. We've got examples of where this can go. We don't have to imagine how far this can go because we've got examples that come from the criminal justice system about problems and ills with facial recognition. So the propensity for ill use and malintent is there. It's a matter, from my view, of increasing the level of national consciousness about AI in general and its capabilities to be able to drive some of these conversations for regular consumers and citizens to ask questions, and then bringing it back to where we are today. It's the same logic around raising consciousness and awareness around how AI is used to solve business problems, even in our own organizations, to help spark some more conversations about how we can mitigate some of these. I also have a lot of faith. I'm with millennials and Gen Z every single day. I teach at UCLA and I teach in the Cal State system. And so I have a lot of faith. I always laugh and say they grew up watching dystopian movies. They grew up, with, all of this stuff that Gen X and baby boomers didn't see. They have a very different perspective on the future, and they're very serious about their privacy and their privacy and their data. So my hope is, and my belief is, that they will find solutions and workarounds for some of this to help mitigate the ill that can happen or result as a result of the malintent or use of facial recognition.
Well, again, Dr. Horton, thank you for sharing. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. All right.